Today's episode is brought to you by Terrero. Stop worrying if your peers have the environment to run your automation. Terrero is a free tool that enables you to launch Python, playbooks, and plans against production while handling dependencies. Find out more at terrero.dev. Terero.dev.
Packet pushers.
Hello, welcome to the Network Automation Nerds podcast, where we explore the latest in network automation from a practitioner's perspective. I'm your host, Eric Chou, a network engineer who loves everything about network automation. Today, we have a truly inspiring story and a powerhouse guest in the world of DevOps, SecOps, cloud security, and the co-host of the Day 2 Cloud, soon to be Day 2 DevOps podcast with us, of course, is none other than Kyler Middleton. In today's show, we'll compare and contrast between cloud networking and on-prem networking. We'll talk about network automation in the cloud and so much more. So let's get to it. Hello, Kyler. How are you?
Hello, everyone. Hello, audience. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for the intro. You said cloud and dev and sec and net, and I'm tired just hearing you list that. Someone on LinkedIn messaged and said, please don't make dev, sec, NetOps a thing. Don't do it. Don't bridge those worlds.
Yeah, we just have to keep on doing the hyphens and keep on throwing keywords and buzzwords in front of everything. But it is true. I mean, if you look at your background, your story, every one of those is true because you have such a diverse experience, and we'll, really get into it today, hopefully in, the short amount of time that we have. So before we start, I always start with, kind of the origin story. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into technology? Just from reading your bio, I know you came from like a tech hub, right? You grew up in like Silicon Valley and all that.
No, the exact opposite. Oh, I believed you so much. Yeah, like you said, I have a diverse background because I'm just interested in everything. And that is ADHD at work, helping me out to follow all the trails. I grew up farming, listening to NPR really loudly in a tractor cabin and doing irrigation and stuff like that. And when I learned that there were jobs where you could sit indoors and have air conditioning, I was thrilled, very excited. I think my parents were disappointed that I wasn't helping as much, but I was thrilled. And I just helped other farmers because we were very rural. And at that time, techs would charge by the mile to come to your house. I don't know if that's still the model for rural areas, but
oh my God.
Then.
Yeah.
And so like this strange kid would come over and like try and fix your computer. And I had no skills whatsoever, but I would work for free, and that was good enough for them. And they would pay me with Rice Krispies and brownies and treats. And I was thrilled because I was like 12 years old and I would just get paid in sugar.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting. I mean, to the kids, I'm sure, the item value of the Rice Krispies outweighs, some paper and have some numbers on it.
Totally. And I did need to save up for N64 for Nintendo 64 games. But beyond that, I really was just looking for sugar and just for having fun. Like computers are just fun. They're logic puzzles. That's how I see a lot of my job. In my profession and in my consulting, I just kind of go in and find intransigent projects that are stuck and try and help. Helping people is just so much fun and so useful for the world. I find a lot of value in it. So that's what gets me out of bed in the morning.
Of course, from a practitioner's perspective, like real hands-on experience fixing computers, those are very valuable. But did you actually go to school? Did you go to university to learn that? Or was it all hands-on and just work experience?
Not really in terms of school. So I did go to college. I was first in my family to go to school. We had a little party when I got accepted, which everyone gets accepted, but we still had cake. Sugar is really a theme through these autobiographies.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say.
And I believed this thing that turned out to be very, very wrong, which was that computers are easy for everyone. So I didn't realize they were a job. And I just wasn't exposed to that in high school. There was no computer classes in my high school. There was typing. I can type like crazy because that was the only thing I did when I was a teenager. And I went to school to be a librarian because I love kids and I love books and I like to help people learn stuff. So I've tried to bridge that into tech. I'm sure we'll talk about that more. And a couple of years in, I realized, oh my goodness, tech is a job. Computers don't just make sense intuitively to everyone. And I thought, oh my goodness, my life has changed. So I switched my career path to computers in college. And then my little tiny college in Nebraska canceled the whole computer program. I went to a tiny college.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, they were like,
wow,
who uses computers anymore? I'm sure that's a fad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is going to take off. I mean, like this internet thing, oh, just a fad.
Totally. So I had a couple of classes in it before it gets canceled. I got a web design minor. That's the closest I've come to formal education. Everything beyond that was just messing around. And to this day, that's how I describe my job, and troubleshooting is like, I'm just going to go play with computers. I'm going to hit all the buttons and see what they do.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of similar to me. I mean, I didn't go to like a tiny college, but I did realize too late that computer is something that I wanted to do. So I ended up just looking for any, kind of relevant themes I have. And I did get a minor in web design as well. And back then it was like Adobe Flash and like, oh, not even Adobe, it was like Macromedia Flash and, web design. So it's not even relevant to networking. So you got your minor and you came out, and how did you break into the world of tech? Because that's a question that I get hit a lot with the listeners who wants to switch career maybe, or who's just getting into the field. How do you break into it without like a degree?
Totally. I think it helps a lot if you know someone, and I didn't, but if you know someone, use that. Please leverage that. Go get an internship at their company. But I
Yeah.
didn't. So I started at Best Buy and I started
Mm.
working selling computers, and I loved that job because you just get to be chatty. I am an incredibly social person professionally. And in my off time, I read books in a quiet closet, but professionally, I'm very social, as you can probably tell. So I made friends with everyone. I made friends with the Geek Squad manager at Best Buy with like the Mormon outfit with the tie. And I said, "You need me. I'm friendly. I'll sell a lot of stuff." And I got hired,
You
and
become
I
one of those kids that charge by the mile to go fix computers.
yeah, it's kind of a revert of like my growing up. And I
Yeah.
was terrible at selling stuff because I wanted to give away everything for free. I just
Hmm.
about got fired because I didn't want to charge people money. Like computers are easy for me. So it feels like I should like give it away for free. I want to help them. And eventually I was able to land an IT1 job at a company called OtterBox that makes those little phone cases that you can throw off a building. It's a wonderful company to grow up in. And I just said yes to all the opportunities I could find. I played to my strength as much as I could. Like I'm social, I'm personable. Use that as much as you can. You might not be like incredibly effervescent like I try to be, but steer into what you're good at. If you're really hyper logical, use that.
That's a great advice, play to your strength. And, we don't need another average technician, but we do need another, very outgoing technical people who are able to explain things to, those of us who are not perhaps expertise in what you're good at. So I think those are a good combination and great advice to have. And I saw your post about your CCIE experience back in 2015. And do you want to tell us a little bit about it? I find it very inspirational, but I think you tell a better story than I do.
I'll do my best. So at Otterbox, I worked my way up. I built some call centers for them. I scaled their call center from 12 call center agents to 300, doing call center stuff with UCCX, I think is what it's called. I don't know if it's still called
Yeah,
that.
like unified communication something something.
Center something. Totally. I forget, but yeah,
Yeah, they
totally.
rebrand every other year.
And you start to learn networking because you have to learn QoS to run VoIP. And I just thought this networking
Correct.
sounds really cool. And the Bible of this industry was written in 1990. And that's very strange. Like Kubernetes changes every month. So this is
Hmm.
kind of cool that like TCP/IP Bible came out in 1990. And I just started doing those certs. And eventually I worked my way all the way up to studying for CCIE, and I passed the exam, which I was very proud of myself for. And then the real monster begins. And the CCIE is like a master's degree, it's intense. And I studied 20 hours a week for 13 months. Which was huge. I gave up all of my hobbies and friends and spending time with my partner, who was very unhappy for that year and change. And then you fly to San Jose and you pay $1,600 to get locked in a room like a white collar prison. And you build what you would otherwise build in like a month in the next 6 or 7 hours. And it's
Right.
so complex. You build all sorts of technologies. It's a really fun exam, if not for the incredible stress and expense. And I failed. I studied so much. I tried so hard. You had to sacrifice so much to get there, and I didn't succeed. And that's pretty common. The pass rate for CCIEs is low, is like 5 or 10%. And I knew that I could fail. But when it actually happened, I just sat down and I was so defeated. And I was like, I'm not willing to continue sacrificing my life. It's been more than a year of this. I'm done.
Hmm.
And I decided to move on and just focus on my career and doing the other stuff that I like and am good at. I'm still a strong engineer, even though I failed this exam. And it transformed my career to just focus on the stuff I'm good at. Again, coming back to my strengths. and giving up on like, I'm not a very good test taker. I never have been,
Hmm.
but I'm a pretty good engineer. I'm pretty good at solving problems. I did pass the troubleshooting part of the CCIE. That was the 1/3 that I did pass.
But since you talk about voice, right? So the CCIE track that you went after, was it voice or routing and switching or?
It was route switch, but all of them are expired now. It was really sad when I let my certs expire. When you get
Yeah.
another cert in the Cisco land, it renews all the lower certs. And I had 2 CCNPs, 3 or 4 CCNAs, wireless, route switch, security, and I think a couple of minor certifications, but it was route switch. And I was all Cisco all the way. I hate dealing with the licensing part, but I really like the iOS platform and configuration and stuff.
Right. Yeah. For me, I got mine back in 2008, but I totally get what you're saying because I mean, I failed 4 times actually before the fifth time I was finally got through it. But, the first 3 times was, I actually won the first attempt in like an event. And I was just like, oh, yeah, I'll go take it.
Oh,
And then
that's
the
cool.
other two were like, I was working for Linksys. So, you kind of have 50% employee after they acquire Linksys. So, you kind of take it. But the next attempt was really like the soul crushing one where I really took a shot and did not pass. Like you said, right? Like it's not just the time you spend, it's also the expense. You told everybody around you that you're taking this so that when you did not pass, you also have to explain to them, especially to your spouse or your partner, like you said. So it's really soul crushing. So
Yeah.
you really have to look yourself in the mirror and say, do you want to continue or not? And it's okay either way. Like you stated in that LinkedIn post, it's about, being resilient, play to your strength, and realizing that it's okay to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. I bought a book when I first started studying called CCIE Strategy, and it wasn't about the technical part, but it was about how do you study? What buy-in are you going to need? What are you going to need to get ready for personally? And one of the early steps was like talk to your partner and your family because they're going to sacrifice for this too. So it's hard when you go back. It's not just you making the sacrifice, you're making the choice with your family. And that can be tough. That's amazing. You went back, but you got it, right? Like fourth try, you got it. That's amazing. Oh no,
The fifth try.
fifth try.
Yeah,
You
I
got
wish it
it.
was the fourth try. Yeah, but tell that to my wife. It's the fifth try. And by the time that I took my fifth try, I was already with Amazon. And I don't want to say they don't value certification, but it certainly wasn't as much of a, I guess, feather on your hat than some enterprises. So they were like, hey, if you pass, great. We'll give you, I remember it was like $100 bonus or something, right?
Oh my goodness. Study for 2 years, then here's $100 as a bonus.
Exactly, exactly. But back then, Amazon was really thrifty and it was early days of AWS. So as we talked about on, day two cloud. But anyways, what I took away from your post was really this mindset, this resiliency. And I hope people, kind of look at it that way and, kind of read your posts and listen to your talk and, kind of just how you grow your career. I think that's really inspirational and really helpful for people.
Thank you. And it'll certainly be linked in the show notes. This voice does not belong to that person anymore. I look a little different than that old picture, but that blog was written in 2015. It's almost a decade ago. It's a lifetime ago.
Mhm.
And then after that, I just built my career in networking and eventually did value-added reseller and then consulting. And I found a company that like I could see cloud was coming up. I didn't really cotton onto that until like 2017, 2018. And
Mhm.
there was a company that had a post that said, we're fully AWS, we're fully cloud, but we need someone today. We need someone now. And we know you don't have experience, but you seem like a good learner. And I was like, I don't know if that's true, but I hope it's true. Yes, please. And I had a week of overlap with the network engineer that was leaving. Then it was the only person left on the network team that ran all the automation for the AWS environment. And it was like,
Wow.
good luck, buddy. Like, good luck figuring it out. And I worked so hard. It was incredibly frustrating and fun. A lot more stuff applied than I thought. I was really worried that cloud was totally different. Like there'd be no TCP,
Mhm.
there'd be no routing, and nothing I learned is useful. It's just named different and use a web portal instead of a command line, but it's all the exact same stuff. So that really helped to catch me up quickly.
So that's interesting that you mentioned that because this was, when we kind of brainstorming on the topics, what we're going to talk about, I always know like you're like this treasure trove of knowledge that, we could tap into, but we're brainstorming on which part should we talk about. That is what we talked about is with your background in both network engineering and cloud, the kind of the differences and the similarities between the two. You mentioned, TCP and slash IP doesn't change, BGP doesn't change, but what are other things that you think are, kind of the same, right?
Totally. Well, it's all the same technologies when you're working with like a cloud provider versus your like local Cisco ASA or iOS switch or something. But it's interestingly like the tooling is kind of bad. And that's still striking to me, where you could go into like a firewall or a Cisco router and you can configure like route maps to AS path prepend your BGP and have floating routes and stuff. Like that's very bread and butter for local routing. That's very much a competency that everyone should have. In AWS, you don't have that. You can't even see the routes that you're receiving. You can't even see sometimes whether the tunnels are up. Is it a crypto problem? Don't know. Good luck. Maybe you should pay for a support contract and we'll tell you. And so we're certainly still pretty nascent. We're still pretty early with cloud tools for networking stuff. When you move over, it seems incredibly complex. And when you start to dig in, you're like, oh, they don't even have floating routes. You can't even see the path for these routes. How do we do redundant routing? And you kind of just don't.
Right. Now we're getting into what is a little bit different, right? Like the tooling, the visibilities, the abstraction that the cloud gives you. Those are all very much, if you're not used to it, I would say it's kind of strange, right? Like the fact that we have a VPC and all these terms we're using AWS as an example, right? But there's the equivalent in Google Cloud and Oracle's and Azure of the world. But let's just say you have a VPC and it's a little bit different where you could think about like a HA or anything that's physically related. It's not applicable to the cloud. So I think that's one of the things that you have to get familiar with. It's just the fact that you will have a virtual private cloud network, which might be equivalent to a subnet in your on-prem network.
Yeah. When I first started with AWS Cloud, like, how do I log into the core router? How do I log into the VPs? Like, how do I do the CLI?
Right.
Oh, you don't. You just imagine it. You just imagine that it's there and it always works, right? And that's fine, but I want to check. I'm a network engineer. I'm an engineer. Like, let me see the code. And it works pretty much.
I think you're right. It's just this getting used to of only be able to receive what they give you. That's so weird, right? Like you're not the master of your domain. You're just a tenant. You're along with whatever X amount of tenants that they have. You're just one of them. However, they give you this subset of the network that you're able to control, but you're also able to define, which is crazy.
Yeah. It's something else that was really different in a kind of negative sense was there's no virtual IPs. There's no floating IPs that you can have like a failure domain between hosts or something like that. If you reach out to your TAM or look on the internet for stuff like that, they'll say like, well, write a Lambda, write an automation script that's triggered every 2 seconds that'll check. Like, I don't want to write a Python program. I want to configure VRRP between 2 routers or something. And like, that just doesn't exist. It's automation at a different scale and a different configuration, different method than you would find locally.
So do you think that's a disadvantage or bias toward developers when it comes to the cloud? Because they were, let's face it, to begin with, they were gearing toward developers. So it might be easy for them to write a Python script to, check whatever it is that they need to check. But for a traditional network engineer who grew up on the CLI and the Cisco configuration and Juniper configurations, it's not on a daily basis that they write Python scripts, right? So do you think that is a disadvantage? And because of that, network engineers are less adapt to the cloud environment?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that network engineers and database engineers are just kind of left behind here in terms of this automation scripting style world. It's certainly set up for developers when you're working in clouds. And you can learn it, but it's hard. A lot of the abstracts and imagery that you're used to doesn't exist. You're not going to SSH into the router to look at the route tables. You might run some API calls, but to do that, you'll need IAM for permissions.
Right.
You'll need somewhere that can connect. So you're doing like Lambdas or pivoting through a Bastion host that's a VM. So there's just a lot more stuff that you need to learn to just get to the basic skill set. To learn it, like to learn anything, you just kind of go do it, which is kind of neat. For Cisco, you maybe have like a GNS3 that helps you like virtualize a router to get into it. In AWS, you can just deploy a free VPC.
Yeah, right.
Just go do it. So it's much easier. You don't have to buy a Nexus switch that you put in your basement and it eats up $100 a month in energy. You just create a VPC by hitting a button and then you can play with it. So I really encourage folks to just go skunkworks it, like just go mess around and hit all the buttons, because that way that I talked about earlier of learning computers by hitting all the buttons, that works really well in cloud environments. It's very accessible.
A quick sponsor break to hear about Terrero. Terrero is a free tool from the network automation and orchestration folks at iTential. What does Terrero do? Terrero builds an execution environment around your Python scripts, Ansible playbooks, or OpenTofu plans so that you can run them as a service. This means that you don't have to worry whether or not your peer will be able to run your automation. You're getting rid of the "it works on my laptop but nowhere else" problem. Because once that automation exists as a Terrero service, all the dependencies have been handled. So I worked through the Terrero Hello World demo, and it was straightforward. I installed Terrero on an Ubuntu box. Linux and Mac are both supported, including Apple Silicon, and connected Terrero to a public GitHub repo that I created for the test. In that repo was a simple Python script and a requirements.txt. I told Terrero to create a service around that Python script, and Terrero read the requirements file and built the service. Now, the script is executable via Terrero Run. Terrero can be run on a single machine your team shares in local mode or in a server mode that dispatches automation jobs to Terrero clients. Build your automation, turn it into a Terrero service, and share it with your team. Download free Terrero at terrero.dev. That's Torero.dev.
Yeah, so in a way, I think I don't want to say diminishes, but it puts the different, I guess, requirements in the cloud. And I do think it diminishes the importance of a traditional network engineer just because, and this is very apparent in their approach. James Hamilton have repeatedly been on reInvent and any kind of AWS event says, network is in my way. Our objective is to get the network out of the way by not having people to have specialized networking knowledge. And for that sense, database knowledge or anything like that. And just to be able to just develop. And like you said, the cost of experiment is so much lower in the cloud, which is an advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There is still routing. It's interesting because those networking skills, that troubleshooting and TCP IP and routing, that is still absolutely essential in the cloud because you can still have circular routes. You can still have stuff that's routed to nowhere or NSGs or security groups that are blocking traffic. That's still so relevant, but it's kind of hidden.
Mm-hmm.
They have tried to add abstraction so you don't have to mess with it. And in my opinion, they've just kind of hidden the problem. So when it breaks, it's not as apparent. So I'm not really a fan of like, let's hide it away. I compile my own tools too. So like maybe I'm not the target audience here, but I do see that networking skill set is still incredibly valuable. You'll still have to learn how AWS views the world and views networking. And like you said, they don't want to think about it. So it's abstracted away.
Right.
But your routing skill set is still very much useful and applicable here.
So what would you recommend for a network engineer who have been out of school for 3 to 5 years? Imagine you're, like somebody who has the CCNP routing and switching or enterprise role or whatnot, and they're trying to get into the cloud. So what would you recommend them go learn next? Is it to get certified in AWS networking, Azure networking, or is it to get some hands-on experience?
Totally. If you want to stick in the physical world and work for a VAR, you could totally still go for Cisco. That's still incredibly relevant. But a lot of those high-level skills that you're going to learn on a CCIE are no longer relevant. Like you're not doing MPLS tag popping in AWS or Azure. That's just beyond the scope of cloud networking.
Right.
I would recommend basic level AWS or maybe Azure. In my experience, Azure is growing quite a bit faster than AWS. So I would start there with some certifications. I'm not really a certification person anymore. I soured on the taste of certifications after the CCIE, but it'll certainly get you started. If you're not sure where to start, do certs. But there also are other ways to learn. The Pluralsight, the Coursera world, there's lots of great courses out there. And like Terraform, for instance, is a really wonderful way to get started. You can also use Tofu, the open source one, to just see what resources exist and see the config flags that exist. Again, in the sort of scheme of hit all the buttons, and it will read all the buttons for you, all the little bools to set on or off, and you can mess around with them then that way. So there's a lot of tools available to you to get started.
Yeah, I would agree with the amount of documentation in the amount of tools. I mean, certainly different from the early days, but now the documentation and the support group, as well as the cost for experiment, has gone down quite a bit, especially if
Hmm.
you go through like the free tiers that you could actually launch, what do they call, like T2 small or T2 medium, kind of a
Hmm.
VM instance, and it costs almost nothing, especially use the credits. However, there's still services within AWS networking that are quite expensive and quite difficult to get started, like, your direct peering, or any type of things that require, or like WatchGuard, or like some sort of like shield, or like security groups. There are some services that are kind of cost prohibitive in my opinion, but there are certainly other services that are easy to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And start with the free stuff. T2.smalls are free for a year for your account when you create a new one. And
Right.
you can use the little plus in your Gmail account and just create another one. Kyler plus one, Kyler plus two,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
just do it free for a year. And wait on that stuff that's expensive. Like if you're chewing through machine intelligence data or WAFs or CloudFront, like that's expensive. Don't put that in your personal stuff unless you're, generating revenue somehow.
Right.
Let your employer pay for a sandbox account and you can do it there. So after you have your skills, they can pay for the expensive testing for those other things.
I mean, that's exactly what I did too. It was just like, hey, are you interested in experimenting with some Equinix direct peering? Then with AWS, like, like it's because I was always, it seemed like magic to me. I mean, worked for AWS, and it was natural to just say, okay, now that you have this isolated environment where you have everything that is self-contained, and if you need to connect the two, use VPN and IPsec tunnels or whatnot. However, to be able to connect your on-prem directly to the cloud as an extension, that's almost magic to me. But when I look into it, it's so expensive just to, like buy a port over at Equinix. So when the chance to come up and just to experiment, I'm like, I'm all for it. I mean, sign me up. I mean, I'll pull in some overtimes to just get it to and see it working. I think that's a great advice to just get started with the free stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I still find it just bizarre. In my personal job, we have some AWS, we have some Azure, and you would imagine there's a button in one of those that says, "Hey, connect to this other tenant, like connect my AWS to Azure for
Yeah.
network peering for high
Yeah.
traffic." No, that doesn't exist at all. You have to contract with a third party, like Equinix is one of the big ones,
Right.
and you do a direct connect on the AWS side to Equinix, and then they run a little port over to the other one that's connected to an Azure router on Express Route. And so like you're paying this third party to have like a router and a cord to connect them. So it's I don't know why. I think it's maybe anti-competitive a little bit. But yeah, and you're paying so much money for those interconnects. Most everything in the cloud, this is very, very different than on-prem, is done over the internet. So knowledge of HTTPS and TLS to keep everything secure because it's over the public internet and anything can happen out there is much more common in cloud environments, especially if you're multi-cloud. It's pretty rare in my experience to have that type of private interconnect. It's certainly possible, but I see almost everything, especially when you have high throughput requirements, just go over the public internet. So that could be something you start boning up on if you're looking into cloud. Make sure you understand TLS and HTTPS and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just from the brief conversation that we've had, it's so much broader nowadays. I mean, I feel sad or, kind of sorry for the people who are just getting into the field. They're just being bombarded with all these terms and technologies, and it's almost like never-ending battle that you have to learn these other stuff. So I think back to what you were talking about, the way that you describe yourself as you're confident in your ability to learn. I mean, that's super important, right? That's kind of your
Mhm.
macro level. Like it's same as writing and, public speaking. It's the same skill set that, overarching skill sets that could help you in adapting to whichever situation that you are. So I want to ask you about that. When I heard you say that, how is it that you're able to learn faster, or like how to learn? Like how did you get to that point?
That's an amazing question and one that I sort of know the answer to. I am fascinated with how all this stuff works. I think it's so cool that a lot of this stuff was invented before I was born
Mhm.
and has iterated incredibly quickly since then. And I feel like I'm playing catch up. I always comparing myself to the heroes in the field because you will rub shoulders with them when you start writing code. and you see tools that are brilliant and you think, am I terrible at this? Should I not do this career anymore? But it's just because this whole career moves really fast. This whole industry is iterating over itself and eating itself all the time. So the ability and the interest level to learn are critical. And I have seen, this sounds like an anecdote or a silly story, but I've literally known several people that quit and open bakeries and just say, like, I'm going to have a mechanical checkout machine and I'm never going to touch a computer again. Because if you're just not really interested, at least in computers, you will burn out.
Mhm.
And there's wonderful money in that burnout, but it's not worth it. You will not feel good for a long time if you do. So just see if it's interesting to you. If you like playing with computers, you will be interested enough to be able to learn quickly enough to keep up and make a career of it.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Like, start with your curiosity. So I'm paraphrasing. So start with your interest.
Yeah, let your curiosity lead you. If you take one thing from this, it's let your curiosity lead you. Feed your curiosity whenever you can. You can try and steer it towards something that'll make you money. But if that's tech, if that's cloud, steer into it. It's cool. It's amazing. And it's a pretty good salary too.
I forgot who it said, maybe you know, but somebody have said if you work on something that you like, or if you work on something that interests you, then you would never have to work again, right? Like, it's, getting paid for your hobby.
Totally. And I personally just find, like, I'm a teacher that also does computers. So again, steer into your interest. Let your curiosity and your interest lead you towards anything, and you'll be successful.
I love that curiosity, and let the interest lead you. And I'll also throw in, kind of this deliberate practice that I always think about when I draft my own lesson plans is, getting into something new. I always want to stretch your comfort level, but don't stretch too far that where it's impossible. So, like, say if you're learning tennis, right? Like, you don't want to play Roger Nadal, although I don't think he's number one anymore. Just an example out there, guys. Give me a break. Haven't followed tennis in a while. You don't want to play the world's number one tennis player, but at the same time, you don't want to play your kids that you beat them every single time. So you want to stretch your ability to, somewhere in between, so that you do that deliberate practice, always stretching a little bit. So same with learning. I'm curious to hear your example, but the example that I have right now, I'm trying to learn AI and machine learning is, just to find relevant examples and stretch a little bit on the possibility and the adjacent possible use cases. So, I mean, is there anything that you're learning right now that, you could kind of tie in your framework to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's important to break projects down into little pieces. That's
Mhm.
a totally non-technical skill.
Right.
I built a whole deployment platform using Terraform, using OIDC, using a whole bunch of techs that I've never touched before. And if you just sit in a box at your desk and you think, I need to build the whole platform and the authentication and the Terraform, and I need to teach everyone and it has to work and not break, that's impossible. There's too much to fit in your head.
Right.
So break big projects into little mini sandwiches. That's an analogy we use at work. You can't eat an elephant, but you can eat a sandwich at a time. And that will eventually, with enough sandwiches, eat the elephant.
I like the theme that we're, echoing back into, like, the sugars.
It's all about eating here.
And that stuff, the cakes and, the rice cookies. And yeah, I love that. I want to talk a little bit about network automation in the cloud, because I know you're an expert in, Terraform. Well, at least better than me at Terraform and, OpenTofu and the DevOps. So do you have any recommendations for people who want to start with network automation, but specifically for cloud networking?
Sure. My GitHub is public. So I, of course, came from networking and went into cloud. And so you can read back on my public repositories a little bit and find some of the tools I created that do network stuff in the cloud. I try to release as much stuff as I can without getting fired, just for free, open sourced. So KaiMid, I'm sure we'll link that in the show notes.
Yep.
But other than that, something cool. One of my earlier projects with Terraform was you can run Terraform and it will deploy a Cisco ASA in an AWS VPC, and it will permit you to SSH to it to play with it. It's not a free project because it's too big of an instance. It'll start charging you, but it'll charge you like $5 a month or something. So you can just learn Terraform and learn authentication. I have a write-up on Medium about how to do that. And you'll end up with a Cisco ASA, a familiar environment if you're from the like local networking world in the cloud. And you can see what it looks like. How fast is it? You can bandwidth test it, you can configure it. And I think those bridge projects where maybe you have 50% of the knowledge needed to do a project is a wonderful place to start. But that's the same advice I give to people when you're looking at jobs. Don't find a job that you know 100% of the tasks. You'll be bored right away. Find one that's like 50 to 70% that you know how to do. And the rest of it should be growth opportunities because there's enough for you to be passionate about and learn and be interested and actually do well at the job and not just be bored right away.
Yeah, that's great. If I were just to, again, paraphrase what you're saying and kind of summarize is to lead with your interests, to break your big project into digestible pieces or small sandwiches, as you talked about, and stretch your imagination a little bit, stretch your comfort zone a little bit to have that deliberate practice where you're still growing and find that adjacent possibility, like 50% of what you already know about Cisco ASA, but you don't know the way to launch it in the cloud, maybe manually, maybe with Terraform. And think about that sense of accomplishment where you're launching it for the first time and you're like, hey, you're pounding your chest. You're just like, hey, look, I made that fire, like Tom Hanks, right? Like, I made fire, guys. No, you didn't make fire. You just like, kind of rediscover it.
You know more than you think you do.
Yeah.
As a network engineer, you've run Telnet, you've run ping, you've run other NS lookup commands from the command line. A lot of cloud networking is either from the command line running tools like Terraform or curl or ClickOps in the portal. And you have an ahead from some of the other engineers that don't run commands in the command line. So like install Terraform in your command line. You already know how to run commands in the command line and just start doing it because you know more than you think you do. You know public and private IPs, you know routing, you know tools that are local, you know half of this project already. The new stuff we'll walk you through.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm ready to go experiment more. Just hearing from you. Yeah. Well, one last question. What does the future hold for cloud and on-prem networking? Do you think it's going to be 80-20? Do you think it's going to be all cloud? Or because I kind of see the shift, right? Like it was the cloud and cloud everything, and now it's shifting back into on-prem because people start to realize they can put everything in the cloud. So what do you think the future holds for networking in the sense of cloud and on-prem?
I think cloud was sold to a lot of us as it's cheaper and faster, and that's not correct. It's for sure faster, but it is not cheaper. It's quite a bit more expensive to run stuff in the cloud. But your tooling is significantly more mature. So you can develop very quickly, you can deploy, you can automate. And so that stuff comes at a premium. So it'll depend on what the businesses in the industry you work with require. Do they want to move fast or do they want cheap and stable, which would be the data center option? I think a lot of the machine learning applications that are getting so big now are going to move to local data centers because they require just an absurd amount of compute that's very, very expensive in the cloud. And everything else that's kind of complex and has to be developed quickly, I think we'll see a lot of that remain in the cloud, unless it's very heavy compute-wise.
I see that as well, even if you overlay that with corporate structures. So for the more agile, startup-y needs to get things done fast, they start with the cloud, they're quote unquote cloud native. But for the more established enterprise, especially, government or I don't know, financial services or hospitals, where there's a lot of regulation involved that they will need to be on-prem and it's stability at the expense of speed. So I do see that as well. I really enjoyed that conversation. Where can people find you if they want to follow your work? And obviously we'll have all those in the show notes, but where can people follow you and find you on public besides Day 2 DevOps?
Day 2 DevOps. Yeah. So me and Ned like to talk about just all things DevOps, which is a lot of fun and make fun of each other a lot. But I am also on kyler.omg.lol, which is actually a real website. It's hysterical. I'm never giving up that domain ever. And I'm pretty active on LinkedIn and also on Medium. I have now 54 articles published in the Let's Do DevOps series, where I just try to make DevOps really easy and approachable with pictures and tools. And I explain what commands are doing. And I just want everyone that is interested in this stuff to be able to find it approachable. Because we've all gone to Stack Exchange and read that the question we're Googling is the stupidest question in the world. And why would you ask this? And I never want anyone to feel that small. So come check these out. They're very accessible and you can build some cool cloud stuff.
Nice. Always a teacher at heart. So thanks again for being here. Really enjoy our conversation.
Heck yeah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Network Automation Nerds. Do you have any feedback for Network Automation Nerds or for this podcast, for our guests? Send me some follow-ups at packetpushers.net/fu. I want to hear from you. Check out our website at packetpushers.net to find other network engineering focused podcasts, blogs, YouTube videos, and Slack channels. Last but not least, remember that too much network automation will never be enough.